Good morning, Professor. This is Laretha Lewis, and my research presentation will be on diarrheal illness and lower respiratory infections. The class is COH 606, Epidemiology for National University, and the slide presentation was created April 23rd of 2018. Before we move forward, I would like to caveat that it is 2 o'clock in the morning, and I have previously made several attempts to upload my previous audio presentations to the Blackboard, as well as to provide an email account to no avail. So my intention is to start over and um, possibly create a YouTube link so that I can submit that into my assignment section for credit. So I do have 15 minutes to get this done. I don't want the audio to be longer than what it needs to be. So without further ado, let's push forward. Article presentation and discussion. Of course, this presentation is based on epidemiological methods. My main highlights are a few articles that I pulled majority of my information from, if it was not common knowledge. A lot of credible sources here. And as you can see that most of what we're going to discuss is examining risk of lower respiratory infections and diarrheal illnesses in children from both Ghana and Brazil. So this presentation examines how these researchers apply epidemiological methods in undertaking their research. So I hope you enjoy my presentation. What is existing problem? In general, children living in poor settings or who exhibit frequent diarrheal episodes run the risk of also exhibiting symptoms of acute lower respiratory infections. Although hundreds of studies have documented the association between family poverty and children's health, achievement, and behaviors, and such, a few measures of these effects have been focused on timing and death and duration of poverty of these children. And many fail to adjust for other family characteristics as well. So what we're going to do here is drill down focusing on not only a geographical location, but a certain age group, and a certain duration of time. So that's what we're going to do. Why is it an important issue to study? For me personally, I took an interest in this topic specifically because I do have my own personal experiences with lower income and how some of the illnesses and infections can take hold, specifically based on geographical location and socioeconomic status. So this is something that I am truly interested in, and I did find rewarding to do research and talk about. So it is unclear if the occurrence of acute lower respiratory infections and diarrhea episodes in these children is because of similar risk factors for both illnesses or if they are actually related. So that's what we're going to find out here. What are the objectives of the study? Researchers wanted to find out if there is a link between acute lower respiratory infections and diarrhea episodes in children existing in poor living conditions. Researchers had examined literature that seemed to suggest that children from poor grounds were mainly dying from acute lower respiratory infections and diarrhea. The two illnesses exist side by side whenever there was an outbreak of each one. of them, according to the earliest studies. And that was put out in 2003. So it's more recent than not. Diarrheal disease has been associated with alarming and dangerous risk factors such as acute weight loss, stunting, and malnutrition. Acute lower respiratory infections are also synonymous for failure to thrive, otherwise called stunting and malnutrition in children. So, essentially what we're reading is that not only are these children not getting what they need as far as physical health, but when it comes down to basic needs, food, water, shelter, this is saying nutrition. Based on nutrition, these children aren't receiving what they need. Researchers examined if the acute lower respiratory infections and diarrhea infections were causally related, or if the two illnesses share common risk factors. What is the population under the study? So as I mentioned before, we are intending to drill down on two areas. So this research was undertaken on children from two countries, Ghana and Brazil. Children were from low-income, semi-arid areas in 1990 and 1991. The researchers sought to examine the effect of acute lower respiratory infections and diarrhea episodes on children under 5 years who had high prevalence in the deficiencies of vitamin A. The population were mainly from poor backgrounds whose exposure to acute lower respiratory infections and diarrhea episodes was high. Full census were carried out on the population, all of the homesteads accounted for in the researches. Eligible children sampled from the study with those that has recent vitamin A supplementation and no recent measles, no active xerophthalmia in between 6 months and 48 months. And just for background knowledge, majority of people know what malnutrition and the measles are, but xerophthalmia is a condition that is due to lack of vitamin A. So it's a vitamin A deficiency, and it causes dryness of the eyes, and it causes an infection. So, what type of study is this? So I chose, this is a cross-sectional study, rather. Cross-sectional study examines data from a population which is often from a representative subset at a point in time. Here, children under 5 years from poor backgrounds in Ghana and Brazil were studied over 2 weeks. Cross-sectional study designs are descriptive, thereby they can feature a population they can feature a population's prevalence. Here, this study examined the prevalence of the two diseases. It may also examine causes and effect. In the case, the study examined why prevalence diarrhea increased the prevalence in acute lower respiratory infections. So cross-sectional study designs are based on criteria set on inclusion and exclusion, determinants, which limits the sample size, and what researchers want to study. Here, the researchers set the limits to children above 6 months and below 48 months. On this particular slide, this is our slide, our study sample. I took the liberty of incorporating some art of local children of Ghana. So, the slide's a bit busy, but we're going to push through. Sample size, it seems to have been determined via confidence level mechanisms. There are constant precision measurements of age 6 to 48 months, areas in semi-arid and low income. So census of whole communities, physiological conditions, and that's the lack of vitamin A, and no recent measles, no active xerophthalmia. The recruiting strategies, community-based participatory research seems to have been the chosen strategy. Researchers approach children from specific communities. Inclusion criteria: age children between 6 to 48 months exhibiting acute lower respiratory infections and diarrhea episodes. Exclusion criteria: the physiological factors: no recent vitamin A supplementation, no recent measles, no recent xerophthalmia, and between 6 months and 48 months. The randomization, simple random sampling was used. After a census, each child with infection symptoms had equal opportunity. No control group was identified in the study. The researchers used Cox regression analysis. It builds a predictive method for use in time to an event data. They also applied Prentice Williams Peterson model, and that's the PWP-CP. And that model is an extension of the Cox regression analysis model. The Cox regression and the PWP-CP were chosen due to the recurrent attribute of acute lower respiratory infections. The PWP-CP rather, accounts for the higher variable nature of diarrhea exposure over time on these children. The main reason for using Cox regression is due to unpredictable nature of diarrhea infecting the chosen sample. Calendar time was used to determine and control season variations of acute lower respiratory infections and diarrhea exposure. So the results were multivariate. Two study populations' basic epidemiology characteristics were plotted as a result. Ghanaian children show higher risk of exposure, diarrhea for longer periods. Studies indicate that Brazilian children mortality rate to be lower than that of Ghanaian children, at 10 times less in 14 days of study, which is a huge difference when we're talking about 14 days. Prior to the 14 days of trial, 76% of all the days did not indicate any diarrhea attacks in Brazil, as compared to 62% in Ghana. Ghana, however, had at least 4% of diarrhea days out of the time period selected for the study that had 14 days diarrhea days. So this is a huge difference, a shift in the numerical data. In conclusion, some of the physical symptoms are, of course, headache, lethargic, runny nose, sore throat, cough, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and diarrhea and acute lower respiratory infections are considered two most proximate causes of global child mortality. An association between diarrhea and acute lower respiratory infections presents a major concern for public health. Acute lower respiratory infections are caused mainly by poverty, poor nutrition, poor sanitation, dirty water, and indoor pollution. Diarrhea shares in some of these causal factors. Ultimately, the underlying causes will have to be addressed, even as a vaccination cause and cause treatment are actively considered. So, despite vaccination, the physical effects still need to be treated. The physical symptoms of poverty and just the environmental settings in general needs to be cleaned up before we should expect any changes, rather. Do you agree with their conclusions? Yes, I agree. Diarrhea